He's a very eager young person who wants to talk to you again. Do you remember Steve Oleski?
No, he brought today again from the airport.
So you saw
Yes, but tomorrow, if you come tomorrow, tomorrow take from General the speech. Oh, you have not the speech. We will take on the tape. Okay. So it's but sometimes even better if it is on the tape than to have it to read.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes from heart, and you see the reaction of the people is much easier than
trying to follow exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Jo, and soft.
But perhaps we can take also vodka and Afghanistan and Vietnam and Iraq. I think in the festival the decision here we wrote the invitation are they would like to do some questions.
Мають і абсолютно ту статтю пускають. Першу частину чи Росія дійсно має рятую частину. Пунктаю всі перекину на кінець.
Fine, yourself? Good. Oh, nice to see you. General, how are you?
Good to see you.
Hello.
Good to see you.
How are you? Very nice to see you. You well? You very fit? Good.
You know?
Yeah, General, how are you, sir? Good to see you. Good to see you. You very fit and well? We've been running up and down those mountains in Colorado.
Yep.
Fine, sir. Good to see you.
Dr. Hyde.
Yes. Yes.
Dr. Hyde.
How do you do? Pleased to meet you. How are you, sir? Great.
Yes, and invite him to the head table.
The other stuff first.
No, you open.
You opened and the other stuff.
You speak. Yes.
What, we make statements of some sort?
Yes, just a brief introduction.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Is Streletsky coming?
I don't know. He
Oh,
may be
yes,
tied
yes, he is later at the reception.
Yes. I think he's tied up.
It's foreign affairs something.
Good.
Looks one at the other.
Not yet.
Trying.
He had already an interview with TV today at
Good.
12 o'clock.
Which program? Is that BBC or ITV?
I think it's ITV. And Don Jordan. He's been in touch with me and I arranged for him to go down to Nicaragua.
The president looks fine, very well. Very well.
Have a chance to go?
Last time we met in Munich
From the US.
Excellent.
On the State University there?
Could you also to the head table?
Oh, we
Thank you very much.
our office in Phoenix. One of my very dear friends,
Very much so.
was a member of our board, went on that service for TAMS. Professor there. He was our ambassador to Colombia. Now he's he was professor of political science and international.
Not bad.
When you're there, I was surprised. Може плащі. Брадфорді. Це якось ніхто не дав.
Господи Равлюк. Да, я вот выправил. Ты всегда сам. Боли тут, боли там, но роки идут. Друга Я написал, я может быть, что русские цари никогда не имели такие настрой. Я опять червеный царь. Английский царь. Бунчмак, Кремлин или аллегорический монстр. А Горбачев, Горбу его Горбан русский, горбанский горба. Это итальянский гобл. Не наглядает. Когда горб. А, когда келька. Это горб. Oni ne mogu slušati, ekonomija
How is Bloc? In Belgium, so
He just talked against against aoun, nothing he talks against Gorbachev, nothing talks against Russia, nothing talks about Korman, no. Just everything he didn't blame on Shah and Dawood. Dawood is finished, he did. Shah is weak, he's finished. Why are you scared from Shah? I'm telling you right now, Gaddafi. Exactly. And he's gone to United Nations very weakly. We sat to discuss the Afghan community in New York. How should I go to make a good support for all the United Nations, all the Afghans behind of him to go in front of the door? He just go by himself. The security guard from the United Nations would come down for this people. I'll show you something.
That's your right.
What are we going to do now?
I don't know. I never know. You? It's not like the military having everything planned for us. Detail.
Somebody's got to be in charge, and I thought that was you. You've got to know what we're going to do. I think the principal thing is to answer questions.
It is very much. There'll be introductory statements. I'll open the thing, and I'll hand over to Yaroslav, who has an important statement to make.
I don't have anything.
No, we speak the heart. Just, just like a sentence or two. Just.
Okay.
Let's shoot you. We're so lucky to have you. We're so thrilled to be able to come. We mean that.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.
Well,
Enjoy being with you anytime.
great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so pleased that you've been able to come to this press conference before the EFC and ABN conference here in London. And at the outset, I would like to introduce to you, and I know that they mostly need no introduction, but I would like nonetheless to introduce to you President of the ABN and EFC, Mr. Jaroslav Stetsko on my right, Mr. Guillermo Kirkpatrick, a member of the Cortes of the Spanish Parliament, Madame Slava Stetsko, and all the way from the United States of America, General John Singlau, my name. Well, as I said, welcome to this conference of the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations and European Freedom Council here in London on the theme of high and low frontier, strategic defense and liberation. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a very timely conference, as our minds have undoubtedly been concentrated on the issues of East-West relations and arms control by the summit meeting between the President of the United States of America, Mr. Ronald Reagan, and the General Secretary Gorbachev of the Communist Party of the USSR, which concluded in Geneva today. The theme of defense and liberation is topical. Without a process of liberation from fear and the tensions and antagonisms that lead to war, there can be no security. Without the liberations of peoples from totalitarian communist oppression, there can be no justice. And justice, as we know, is the foundation for lasting peace. We therefore, ladies and gentlemen, seek self-determination for the people behind the Iron Curtain and all those peoples around the world as well who are suffering the brutality and oppression of Marxist, Leninist, communist regimes. It is our belief that the principles of the Helsinki Accords should be implemented in full, and we are vigorous in our pursuit of human rights. Although the process of arms control and the need for mutually balanced and verifiable disarmament remain uppermost in our minds, a sure defense remains a high priority for the community of free peoples around the world. As we have seen from the way in which the Soviet Union in the last 50 years has not only attacked its neutral neighbors, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Afghanistan, but its allies too, Czechoslovakia and Hungary, vulnerability does not bring security. One-sided disarmament is no guarantee of peace, but rather an encouragement to Soviet aggression. Nuclear deterrence remains therefore a vital necessity. But there is undoubtedly a need for a saner world order than one based primarily on the fear of possible mutual annihilation. The President of the United States is right, in our judgment, to pursue a research program into the potential benefits of space-based strategic defenses, the SDI. And in this, he has our full support. We have delegates from all over the world, from all the continents in the world, people who will speak from great experience. And we have contributors of considerable distinction. Mr. Stetsko, of course, General Singlaub, and tomorrow morning we're opening our proceedings with a speech from one of the foremost experts in the field of arms control and strategic defense, Lord Chalfont of the United Kingdom. It's our belief that this conference will be a great success, and it is my honor to hand over the proceedings to the Honourable Yaroslav Stetsko, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine.
Mr. Chairman, General Singlaub, honorable Kirkpatrick, ladies and gentlemen. The world has been a precarious place to live in for many years. A second generation is growing up with the obscenity of the risk of nuclear annihilation hanging over it. We are told that there is no alternative to maintaining the existence and certain peace between the superpowers other than through containment, detente, or nuclear policies based on the fear of mutually assured destruction, aptly called MID. But all these are merely palliatives. They cannot provide a lasting solution of the global political crisis. That can only be done by identifying its actual causes and then resolving the tackle to the root of the problem. The problem has conventionally been seen as a struggle between two superpowers to carve out and maintain separate spheres of influence which, although in competition, attain some sort of equilibrium. But Russian historical imperialism, now allied to communism, has a different goal, that of world domination. Successive leaders of the USSR have always maintained that communism can logically only succeed in a world untainted by other ideologies. Moscow has pursued this goal unfalteringly since the Second World War, exploiting and provoking wars in Asia, Africa, Latin America, using pacifist movements, fifth columns, disinformation and international terrorism, developing an expert psycho-strategy for influencing the Western media, using espionage to weaken the West's defenses. The concept of the balance of power is useless in the light of all this. It is an anachronism because the essential prerequisites to the balance of power do not exist. It is mutual limited goals without the objective of world domination. Therefore, the Geneva summits, whatever their outcome, will not bring about any real changes in the political aspirations and strategy of Moscow. Negotiations concentrating on playing the nuclear numbers game are not enough. The West must include the forgotten superpower, the subjugated nations, which constitute the overwhelming majority of populations of the Russian Empire in its modern political and military strategy. The winning of the minds and souls of the peoples and armies of the Soviet Union and satellite countries would mean a simultaneous lessening of the military potential of Russian imperial forces. The subjugated nations have at their disposal the weapons of ideas and the actual weapons themselves, and the West must declare its unequivocal support for the legitimate demands for freedom and independence of the nations oppressed by Moscow. However, such a declaration would necessarily imply the rejection of the old political conception of containment, détente, coexistence or balance of power, which are based on the appeasement of every new Russian aggressions, which in recent years have seen even Afghanistan, Angola and Nicaragua included in the sphere of Russian domination. There is an enormous fount of goodwill towards the West and the democratic way of life among the peoples subjugated by Moscow, which the West should build upon by actively supporting the liberation movements within these countries. Just one example of the underestimation of the West of psycho-strategy. There were no extradition of the Ukrainian political refugee sailor Miroslav Medved, disregarding the right of political asylum to Soviet Russian occupant of Ukraine by the order of the U.S. State Department against the decision of the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, chaired by Senator Jesse Helms, was the result of the failure to understand the importance of psychological warfare and bad service to the subjugated nations and the whole free world. A coherent psychological political strategy should be formulated with the subjugated nations, Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus, Poland, Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, Turkestan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, and other nations subjugated by Soviet Russian imperialists and communists as its cornerstone. Direct military support should be given where appropriate, and NATO should create a Department of Psychostrategy for the participation of representatives of the national liberation movements of the nations subjugated by Bolsheviks. The West should also exert economic sanctions by ceasing credits and the export of grain and high technology to the USSR, which would force the Kremlin to refrain from further massive rearmament and expose the weaknesses within the empire. In these ways, the West could give impetus to the dissolution of the world's most brutal and evil empire into national independent democratic states, whilst avoiding the risk of a nuclear holocaust. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, sir, for that very forthright and wide-ranging statement. If I may, I'd just like to ask General John Singlau to say a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that we will avoid becoming over-enthusiastic in the light of the recent meetings between President of the United States and the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. There is a certain euphoria associated with the friendliness that took place there, and while that's desirable, those of us who have spent our lives fighting for freedom or having lived under communism must recognize that we cannot accept the status quo. Today there are now two generations whose only knowledge of freedom comes from the whispered conversations of their elders. But we must think about liberation of those nations that have been subjected to this evil force which my president has on several occasions used to describe the Soviet Union, to the great horror of the majority of the media. But in fact, those of us that know this subject recognize that it is an evil empire, the only colonial empire in existence today, and it is an empire that has as a fundamental policy terrorism against its citizens. And we must not lose sight of that fact in this euphoria of the recent summit meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. And Mr. Guillermo Kirkpatrick from Spain.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Jaroslav Stesko, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending the works of this meeting of the European Freedom Council. We have been following with great interest the developments of the work of the European Freedom Council for several years, and it is for all of us, dear Chairman Mr. Stesko, a great pleasure to see how it is developing and how more and more it is interesting the people of the free world. I come, as you know, from a country that is Spain, and I like to convey you the greetings of the Spanish leader of the opposition, the chairman, president of our political party, Manuel Fraga Iribarne, who is the leader of the opposition now in Spain, and who ought to be here, and he was cordially invited to you, and he would have been very happy to be here with you today. But as you know, we're having elections this Sunday. We're having elections in Galicia, Galicia is the northeast part of Spain, and those elections are very important for our party and for the future of our political organization in Spain. So I'd like to convey you personally the greetings of the Spanish leader of the opposition, Manuel Fraga, and to express to you all the pleasure that we have when we see the work of the European Freedom Council. I come from, as I told you before, from the southern part of Europe, from the southern flank of NATO, from a region which, no doubt, is threatened by the expansion of communist imperialistic views. We are very well aware of the situation of all your countries, and we also take into good consideration the danger which this southern flank of NATO can afford, the dangers that it can suffer in the near future. That is the reason why we take so much interest in following your cause, in helping you, and in trying to help the free world. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we would greatly welcome your questions and observations. The floor is open for discussion. Well, gentleman at the back, please.
It's been said by Mr. Sitskar and...
Could you just identify your name and organisation, sir?
My name is Askol Krushelnitsky. I'm a reporter from the Mail on Sunday newspaper.
Thank you very much.
It's been said by Mr. Stetskar and mentioned by one of the other speakers that the subjugated nations should be viewed as potentially a great ally of the West. What evidence is there, contemporary evidence, that if pressure was increased on the Russian Empire, that the subjugated nations would be able to coherently respond and struggle for their freedom?
I'm of the opinion that during the Second World War was created the Ukrainian insurgent army without the support of foreign powers. In this time, it was possible for 10 years to fight in two fronts against Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. It is the problem to create some objective situation with the aim to increase the national liberation movements behind the Iron Curtain. But it's necessary to organize the psycho-strategy on the part of the West, similar as the Russian center in Moscow organized in the free world, for instance in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, and so forth. And in connection with this, for instance, in the program of the Communist Party under the leadership of Gorbachev, the project prepared at the present time, and in this program is clear proclaimed the purpose of the party to organize and to have so-called national liberation revolutions inside of the free world in Africa, Latin America, and so forth. Secondly, in the Constitution of the Soviet Union, we have the paragraph that the Soviet Russian Empire, so-called USSR, is obliged to support with every possible means the class struggle the World Revolution, the so-called national liberation movements, to provoke the social classes and so forth. And on the part of the Western powers, we have nothing in this sense. We have only Radio Liberty or Radio Free Europe, but Radio Liberty, the contents of Radio Liberty is not adequate to the intentions of the subjugated nations, especially of the Ukrainian nation, because it is not in the sense of the interest of Ukrainian people, for instance, to propagate the idea of national independence. And I would like to underline that the statements of President Reagan, for instance, about Ukraine and other nations, no, it was not translated to Ukraine. It is in Radio Liberty, for instance, are some directives from State Department in other sense. That is the position of President Reagan. This one. Another point is necessary, for instance, to organize, it's my suggestion, some center for psychological warfare in NATO or in Pentagon for this action for political support of the liberation movements. It is necessary to seize the support of Soviet Russian Empire and its satellites, especially with technology, high technology, and other means, including armament. Then, with this pressure of Ukraine, with the pressure, the regime should reorganize the system in the Soviet Union, because to have more grain is necessary by proper means, by own means, not to receive the grain from the foreign countries. It's necessary to reorganize under the pressure, for instance, collectivization, and to give more private property and so forth, and to create the other basis for to increase the liberation fight. In conclusion, I think that in present time, to create this psycho-political center of coordination of the fight between the free world and the subjugated nations is the precondition for the victory for the free world too. I would like to underline the initiative of General Singlov. He published excellent book, The Combat on Communist Territory. It is our idea to organize, to support this fight on the communist-dominated territories. And some suggestions in this book I recommend to all us, not only to read, but to fight for the realization. These suggestions as conclusion of this excellent book, The Combat on the Communist Territory.
Thank you very much, sir. Can I just add one thing for our reporter friend from the Mail on Sunday? If the regime in Moscow has to reckon with a strong and effective dissident opinion among the peoples of the USSR and within the satellite states, the USSR will be less able to conduct a confident, ambitious, and aggressive foreign policy. And I think that that is something we should very much bear in mind, because so many peoples have suffered from just such an aggressive, expansionist, self-confident foreign policy. There are many gathered here in this hall today. General.
I have nothing to add.
Guillermo? Next question? Sir.
My name is Habib Maya. I'm from Afghanistan, and our head office in New York. Just I'm talking about the principle. For the last 7 years, we are fighting directly against Soviet Red Army in Afghanistan. It's 3 years more than the Second World War II, and 4 years more than the First World War I, do you know. Unfortunately, we can get any kind of coverage by the Western media. I don't know why we not give it any coverage about Afghanistan. And I'm interested to, if you will give me your idea, what can we do and how should we get it some more attention of the media about the hard days in Afghanistan, what's going on, to bring for the free world and Western country.
Well, we do have some coverage, sir, but it is undoubtedly inadequate. It's undoubtedly inadequate. And I think the very least the freedom fighters in Afghanistan can expect is a mobilized public opinion within the free world to galvanize the governments of the free world to provide all the assistance that the freedom fighters require. Now, General Singlaub has a direct professional experience from his career as a general officer in the United States Armed Forces, and you have an experience of warfare of the kind that is being conducted in Afghanistan. Perhaps you would give some comments, sir.
The problem that Habib Mayer raises is one that has concerned my organization, the United States Council for World Freedom, for some time. And we are currently establishing an international information service in Washington, D.C., with some professional media people heading it up. And we will start, hopefully, if I get the funding in the next 2 months, in January, we will be broadcasting 4 separate stories each day about these currently 8 active democratic revolutions. These are active, ongoing revolutions where the people under Marxist regimes have taken up arms and have declared that it is better to be dead than remain red. And we will broadcast that story, 4 stories every day for 6 days a week by satellite. Initially we'll be doing this by getting material coming in from the field, and we have 400 stations in the United States that have already said they will take the satellite service. That will be a way of getting the word out that is not now getting out through our major networks. We hope to expand that, where we will be sending television crews out to these various battle areas in Africa, in Southwest Asia, and in Southeast Asia, as well as Nicaragua. And we will then be providing to the independent television stations coverage that is not now coming from the major networks. That's a longer range goal, but starting in January we hope to be doing it by radio, and it's an opportunity, but at the same time it's going to provide an obligation to the resistance movements to get us up-to-date material. But we're going to use modern technology to try to solve that problem.
Well, I think that is a very heartening reply. If I may just add an observation that is, I think, to some degree relevant. I'm chairman of an organization called the Horn of Africa Council, which consists of politicians of all parties, academics, professionals, ex-diplomats, and so on, who are concerned about developments within the Horn of Africa. They're deeply concerned about the lack of development, the poverty, desertification, starvation, and famine. And we've been explaining that in Ethiopia, so much of the famine is man-made, that the Marxist government in Addis Ababa is deliberately trying to starve out the freedom-loving people of Tigray and Eritrea provinces, and that starvation is being used with the forced movement of peoples by the Ethiopians and their Soviet and Cuban advisors as an instrument of war. But to get this across in the media is a message that is very hard, because we are combating a process of disinformation the whole time. And that's why I find the positive measures which General Singlaub has announced on the part of his organization so encouraging. Sir.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished guests, I would like to reply to our last speaker. First and foremost, the Derby branch. This is Mr. Jenkins, Chairman of the Derby branch EFC. We've done a great lot to regard the Afghanistan situation, our coordinator, secretary, and also the reference to Ethiopia. Only last week we had press coverage and also film coverage with the terrific amount of baby clothes we sent, and we are fighting the Marxists every way possible with coordination again of the Christian Derby branch, the Christian Trade Union Association. We never stop, we're working all the time. We've got the aircraft to take the material over for us free of charge, and I think it's credit to the Derby branch of the FC.
So do I, sir. I think we all do. Any other questions? Madam.
My name is Lieta Sander. I am Estonian and I am from Sweden. And I should like to tell our friend from Afghanistan that I myself, every Saturday in Sweden, I am collecting money for you, for your cause in Afghanistan.
Thank you.
And I am in the committee of Afghanistan of Sweden. But there is also very, very difficult, you know, because they always are comparing that Afghanistan is Soviet Vietnam. But I always try to tell them that in Afghanistan, the people, they haven't armament, you know, they need money, because when you were in Vietnam, they got a lot of money from China, from Soviet Union. But that's very, very different, and I hope that we all could help together, Afghans.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. Just first.
Nicholas Chorovsky, Organization for Defense of Four Freedoms of Ukraine. In this present world, when we see that obsession with talking and compromising with the Soviet leaders, it seems to me that our organizations, the Council, European Council for Freedom Council, ABN, and so on, should change a little bit the emphasis on what they're doing. Bringing before the eyes of the Western politicians, and in particular the liberals, the evils of the system, of the Soviet system. It's not enough. Because if we talk about the evils, then they think that by talking with the Soviets, we may do a good service to human rights. Maybe we will reduce terrorism. Maybe by talking with the Soviets, we somehow bring to peace various local wars or revolts or whatever. It seems to me that this tactics of talking about evil and trying to compromise with it won't bring us to anywhere. As I know the Soviet Union and the Russian psychology and the history, I think that we should become a little more drastic and dramatic and point out that compromise and talking with these people won't bring us nowhere. That there is only one solution. Of course, not a simple one. Maybe Prime Minister Stechko pointed out that the captive nations, and working with them is more powerful than atomic bomb or nuclear weapon. Maybe that is the way. But what I think it's important to bring the Western politicians to the realization that the only solution to all the problems we have in the world is to bring the Soviet Union to a complete downfall. Once there is no Kremlin and no Soviet Union, terrorism, local conflicts, artificial famines, subversive activities, they will all disappear. And it seems to me that the earlier tactics about talking about the evils, that it belongs to the past. Now we should talk and bring the Western leaders, with Western public opinion, convince the liberals that the solution is to eliminate Soviet Union somehow, in some way, which is not a simple way, of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question to General Singlo?
Whose side do you want?
General Singlo emphasized that his organization and organizations with whom he works together are now trying to establish very strong help to these 8 regions of fighting hard now, hot wars starting from Afghanistan until Nicaragua. As a representative of Ukrainian nation, I am very eager to know whether General Singlov will go to the further stage to include those who were fighting for so many years during the Second World War and after the Second World War without any help from the West, and now change the tactics but still continue to fight for their independence. I mean Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, Croatia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Turkestan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the other subjugated nations.
Yes.
I finished.
Mr. Hardwick.
Mr. Hardwick, coordinator, Derby FC branch. I'd like to direct my question at General Singler. Early in the meeting, I wish you to enlarge upon, do you think there's a possibility there will be changing attitudes now coming from the United States in regard to the recent meeting between Mr. Gorbachev and President Reagan?
I think that most people who have been concerned about national security issues were deeply concerned that the Department of State, acting as the principal advisor to the President for this meeting, would recommend a trade-off of the Strategic Defense Initiative for some kind of a concession with respect to the arms control agreements. The fact that no such trade-off, no such deal was made is very encouraging to those of us who are concerned about this. I think it's clear also that the President discussed problems such as Afghanistan, the violations of human rights in the communist-occupied parts of the world, to put the pressure on him with respect to the use of terrorism as an instrument of Marxist-Leninist power, both domestic and external policies. And I think that when it is described to the American people, will be very helpful to those of us that are trying to bring attention to these liberation movements, to these democratic revolutions that are taking place, because the comparison in the past has always been South Korea with the United States rather than with South Korea versus North Korea. there have been comparisons of Taiwan with the United States rather than Taiwan with the People's Republic of China on the mainland. And I think that bringing up the communist violations of human rights in these talks was a very useful thing in getting everybody oriented on the essential aspects of the East-West conflict and off of this relatively small part of the conflict which has been the strategic deterrent forces. So I think that yes, there'll be a change in attitude with a greater emphasis on the low end of the conflict spectrum, and I think that is good in the long term.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies, one final one, because I'm happy to announce that at the conclusion of the conference there will be tea or coffee outside the balcony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Basil Deba, Greater London area CTU. It's inevitable that the Russian Empire sooner or later will collapse. We all work and wait for that great day. But at the same time, we got several theories. Some people say only the Third War bring peace and stability and freedom in Eastern Europe. Some, and that includes the IBN and European Freedom Council, tell us that only support, moral and physical support for the captive nations inside the Russian Empire will bring the freedom and stability in Europe. May I also add that what we need in the West as well as start a moral and diplomatic offensive, global offensive, for the decolonization of the Russian Empire. And perhaps at the same time we will manage to convince the men in the Kremlin that the colonization of the Russian Empire also brings benefit to the Russian people, who can divert their resources that they spend on the arms and on the apparatus of oppression. They can divert that resources for the development, for the benefit, for the Russian people, who could live happily ever after in their own ethnographical territory. And if they're short of bread, surely they have the neighbors, the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, and so on. They could help them. They're not so vindictive as they think they are. But eventual decolonization is also in the interest of the Russian Empire. If somebody could convince Gorbachev and company, I think we would be one step forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure that what you say is true. Undoubtedly, there does need to be a moral and political offensive, as you term it, to mobilize the political forces of the free world in favor of a decolonization process on the part of the Soviets. It's not going to be easy, though, to make the leopard change his spots, and we can have no illusions. But undoubtedly it's a campaign that is worth pursuing. And I always think it's highly ironic that we, in the Committee of Free Western Nations, allow the Soviets to get away with the figment that they are the great decolonizers, when the facts around the world speak the exact opposite. Soviet advisors in Ethiopia and Angola, for example, keeping down the people there. The Red Army engaged in a genocidal campaign in Afghanistan, and so on. And while they are always proclaiming their peace-loving purposes and their commitment to decolonization, they do nothing to develop the third world countries that are suffering from poverty, hunger, and disease. All their efforts are directed to providing armaments for their Marxist friends and cronies, to keep them in power and to perpetuate a system of oppression. Now, I would hope that we, for example, would at the very least use the United Nations mechanism more effectively over this question of decolonization. It's a laughable thing, and we've allowed the United Nations to become more and more taken over by the fellow travelers of the Soviet Union. But worldwide, it is a campaign that I think should have our support, and I applaud the way you brought it to our attention. Sir.